Life has drawn you here. Feel the warmth pulling you near. Breathe it in and let it fill your heart. It's like love. Cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins. Breathe it in your lungs, will stay. You've seen it all before, till you found something more. Breathe it in and let it fill your heart. It's like love, yeah. Cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins. Breathe it in your lungs, will stay. For the first time, it'll all make sense, you know. Yeah, you know. It's like love, cleanse your soul. Feel it in your veins. Breathe it in, your lungs will stay. It's like love, for the first time, it'll all make sense. You know it. It's like love. Your soul, feel it in your veins, feel it in your lungs, will stay.
Okay, good morning. Well, actually, good evening to you and good morning from us. My name is Scott Mathieson, and I'm here to talk to you about how to migrate to Australia. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we've got a couple of great panelists on today to help educate you on this opportunity, which is bigger than it's ever been, and we'll explain why, and how you can actually take the first steps to moving to Australia and changing country. So thank you for coming along this evening. If you are in South Africa, or perhaps you are somewhere else in the world, I can see that there's other people who are in other areas of the world now tuning in. So thank you very much. This webinar is about 40 minutes. It's short, it's concise, it's not the entire picture. Every single individual situation is different, but we'll cover off as much as we possibly can, at least to get you to the next step if this is something that you want to do. So once again, thanks for joining us. And I'll introduce you to our first panelist, our Head of Immigration at Working In, Nazim Lalazari. Nazim, if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, sure, Scott. Hi, everyone. My name's Nassim. I'm a registered migration agent. I grew up in Australia in the beautiful Sydney area, probably the best part of the country, although I do appreciate that people do argue about that. So I studied law, and I am a registered migration agent. I've been with Working In for nearly 11 years. So lots of experience helping literally thousands of individuals over that time. So, hello.
Hello. Literally thousands is the word, yeah. And our second panelist in Johannesburg, Anita Matthews, who we've known for many, many years now. Anita, if you could just briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, good evening, my fellow South Africans. Siyabona to all of you. So I have been with Working In since 2007. It's been a fantastic journey over the years, and I am here based in South Africa to help you with your migration journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. I was just recalling when we first met you when we were running the Australian Jobs Expos in 2007 in Midrand, and wow, it was a scorchingly hot day, and there was over 10,000 people came to that expo. What a crazy time that was.
Certainly it was.
But that's how far we go back, and it's great to have you on board. Anita is our South African representative, so at any time after this webinar, it's possible to actually set up a consultation with Anita and have a chat with her about your personal situation. So look, I think what we're going to be covering off today is, what's happening with immigration, what's the situation now, especially with Omicron and the borders in Australia. What is the immigration process? Because there have been a lot of changes. What's the employment market like, and how does that impact you? And then what are the next steps? What do you actually need to do to get ready? This will include cost, because it is expensive, the job market, and just the process. First, I'd just like to touch on what is a MARA, because Nazim is a MARA agent, and this is really important. So maybe, Nazim, you could just take people through the importance of using a MARA agent, whether it's us or with somebody else, to protect you and to make sure that you get the right advice and not to spend money in the wrong direction, which often happens. Nazim.
Yeah, sure. So as a registered migration agent, I'm required to annually apply and have my license renewed to be allowed to give immigration advice specifically for Australia. So myself and all other RMAs go through a rigorous process of having to demonstrate that we have the skills and the ability to help individuals like yourselves. So you can go on the Omara website, you can type in my name or any of the other RMAs here at Working In, and you can see that we have a current license and that we're allowed to provide you with advice. Now, what that meant, and the whole purpose of all of this was to ensure that yourself as the consumer were protected. So we are covered by something called a code of conduct. The way that we act and behave in a professional capacity is dictated to ensure that we're not helping people with, bogus applications that have no chance of success, that we're not leading you down the garden path, and that we actually have the skills and the ability to help you with what we say we're going to do. So when you engage an RMA, you might be paying funds, and those should go into like a client fund. So they're almost held in trust on your behalf, and as work is done, then it comes out. So there's all these rules and regulations around how someone like myself has to operate. And the purpose of that is to give you the protection and the security that that you're being well looked after, and you're not at risk of I guess, exploitation in a way. So yeah, if you're not doing it yourself, you really need to use an RMA. Don't pay anyone who's not registered.
Yeah. Look, I think this is generally a once in a lifetime scenario where people are actually selling everything, moving their kids out of school, changing job, and moving to the other side of the world. And you do want to get it done correctly. And I think there are many stories of people who have been who have given their money to the wrong types of people. So look, that's just a caveat emptor. Beware. And let's move on from that. So look, I think what we're saying is this is one of the best times to move to New Zealand and Australia in history. And we will talk a little bit about New Zealand because there is an age limit for Australia, and for some people who are over 45, there are options to move to New Zealand as well, and we do both markets. So in Australasia right now, because of COVID, the unemployment rate is as low as it's been for years. In fact, last week, Australia announced that the unemployment rate was the lowest that it's been in 13 years. What does that mean? Lots of jobs, lots of job availability, lots of demand for skilled workers. So as soon as that happens, employers start looking offshore, and they're looking for people from, normally speaking, English-speaking countries like the UK, like Ireland, like South Africa. So right now, it really makes sense to be looking at Australia if you ever wanted to migrate, because the job market is so hot. And we've been doing this for so long, and we see windows open and windows close. And COVID has created this really unique environment whereby, the demand for jobs is so intense, it means that immigration is going to increase as soon as the borders open. Now, the other factor, of course, for Australia is that as soon as COVID came in March 2020, then a lot of people left Australia. They went back to their home countries. About 500,000 people who were on temporary visas went back to the UK, back to Ireland, back to Canada, back to the US, and it created this massive shortage of people, especially in industries like hospitality. Okay, so there's a shortage there already. And then, of course, people have still been retiring and turning 65 over the last couple of years. So they've left the workforce, and there haven't been enough people to supplement that. So immigration is normally bound by the job market, even though in Australia you don't necessarily need a job. The job market is always in the background as a lever for immigration. So in that regard, I'll go back to Nazim again, and I'll just say, hey, can you just explain what I was talking about there, the sort of the no job or the job, and you'll start getting into your numbers with the subclass 189. But look, can we just clearly define the two different routes that people can take in terms of moving to Australia?
Sure. I think we've got a slide about that as well. Skilled migration is normally in one of two ways. One is through the independent pathway. I don't know if that's up on the screen yet or not. But what that means is that you are migrating based on points. So if you're a subclass 189, 190, it's a points-based system. You don't need a job offer in order to migrate, and you've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of where you live and what you do and all the rest of it. The other pathway is based specifically on a job offer. Now, there is the odd one where you need to have a job and you need to go through this sort of skilled pathway, so to speak. But normally, you either get a job and then it's an employer-led process, or it's a independent skills-based process. And each one has its own requirements, and each one will have its own costs, and each one will have its own timelines. So depending on your specific skills and what you do and where you may or may not be able to find a prospective employer, you might have different options available. So part of what we do when we're looking at someone's options is seeing, based on the occupation that you can nominate, which of the subclasses will you have eligibility for. Now, obviously, the Australian government has identified that people having skills is really, really important. You haven't had enough people in the country, absolute dire situation, not enough skills. And so the government's announced a range of employment or employer supported visas to be eligible for entry, despite the borders otherwise being closed. So I think that highlights how important people with skills are. And we know that traditionally from South Africa, we have a lot of trades workers coming, and also lots in the health and engineering space as well. So those aren't the only ones, they're just like the most common ones that we see sort of migrating. The other thing is that just the other day, the Australian Prime Minister announced that they basically want everyone to come that's eligible. Please come to Australia. Please come to work. So if that's not a call for people, I'm not quite sure what is. But then the next thing is to figure out for you which option is available and how do you use it to get into Australia to settle.
So basically, to summarize it very, very, very briefly, you have a pathway which means that you can potentially get into Australia without a job offer, or a pathway where you'll need a job offer, but you've got to do a lot of work before you can get that job offer. And then you're on a temporary visa rather than a permanent visa.
Correct. I think the other thing that's important for particularly people in South Africa to note is that depending on your occupation, you might need certain steps to be completed before you could even proceed with a visa based on a job offer. So in some occupations, there's additional requirements for people from certain countries, South Africa being one of them, in which case you might find that there's some basic things you need to do regardless of the process that you're following, and that includes something called a skills assessment. So normally, when from all my years of experience helping people migrate and obviously dealing with the employers as well, you can see that when they're desperate, they want to move as quickly as possible with the people that can move. And so that's why when we talk about being prepared, if you are committed to the process, it's easier for someone to move ahead with you now than someone who might be ready in 6 months' time, because the need is now. Most people won't wait that long.
That's right. So yeah, good information, Nazim. Anita, I mean, you're talking to people every day throughout South Africa and Zim. So what's the general feeling out there for people who are wanting to move, and what do you think are the barriers? What are people concerned about with their move? Is it finding the job? Is it where to live? Is it cost? And maybe we can have a bit of a discussion about that.
Yeah, so in South Africa, I think the big motivation for most people to move these days is political instability in both Zimbabwe and South Africa, and they are looking for better opportunities for their family and their children. And I have an experience that I'm seeing highly qualified people that want to move but need help, doesn't really understand the process. And that's what they need to do, is to speak to people like ourselves to help them to find the right path to move to, for instance, Australia. Another, I won't call it a barrier, but I think it's just an item that needs to be discussed is, the cost to move. This is a major project that people are taking on, and like any major project requires major funding. And what I'm saying to people is take first step first. Find out if you are actually eligible. Find out if you can pass the first step, which is to get information ready and understand, yes, I can take the first step and find out that I can qualify for a visa in Australia. So that's really, I would say, the major issues that South Africans and Zimbabweans are facing at the moment, is just to understand the process and be that, yes, it is costly if you want to move to Australia or any other country for that matter.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really valid point, and we do sympathise with South Africans simply because the rand doesn't have the same strength against the Australian currency. And it does feel like you're paying a lot more in order to migrate than, say, someone from the UK who's, earning pound sterling. But I guess this is the price that you pay. It is what it is. We can't do anything about that. But what you've said, Anita, is a really, really, really good point. What we've tried to do over the years, which is really helpful, is we have a tool called Your Visa Path. It's essentially an eligibility assessment. We gather all your details, and that allows us to really understand fully, like Anita said, exactly the best possible and most efficient pathway for you to migrate to Australia. There are so many different options with Australia, and especially if you are, shall we say it, like borderline, it requires a lot of brain power from Nazim and her legal team to work out, hey, look, is this a way that we can do that? For example, you might not be able to move to Sydney or Perth like you want to. You might have to take one of the options of going to a region because that's the only way that you can get in. But you would want to know that, and most people would sacrifice going to a region for at least a couple of years in order to migrate. So that eligibility assessment, Anita, can you remind me of the price of it in rand, in South African rand?
It's around about 3,950 South African rands. It fluctuates a little bit here and there, but not too much, just with the currency.
Yeah. And look, I think the thing about that is once you've committed that money, then you, at the very least, you would know exactly where you sit. You know exactly how you can get into Australia. You don't have to use us. There's no obligation, but you absolutely know what your next steps are. And if you don't meet the criteria for immigrating to Australia, or we might even suggest you have a look at New Zealand, but if you don't meet that criteria, we'll tell you what you do need to do in order to meet that criteria. Maybe it's next to qualification, maybe it's a couple of years more work experience, but at least you'll have the picture. And Nazim, I mean, in your experience, what has that meant to people, having that upfront information?
Well, I think it gives you, I guess, a bit of power in order to take control of your destiny. If it's not for you, then you know. But if you can do something about it, you can start planning around it. So we recently had someone where they were quite confident that they qualified, and almost to the point of cockiness, they're like, oh, I don't really need this, but I'm going to get you to do it anyway. And we came back and we pointed out that they were probably 3 years actually away from qualifying in order to migrate. And so although it was a bit of a shock, it meant that they could start planning their life around when they could formally start the process. So, oh, well, that's good. Then I will take this further course of study. You know, I will take that job. You know, I will move to the other side of the country while I'm, you know, waiting to get to the point where I can start the process. So I think at a time now where we have more uncertainty about what we can do tomorrow than we've ever had, it's nice to know what you can control and what you can do or not do, because you can just plan.
Yeah. And so for those people that don't meet the criteria for the permanent residency visa that doesn't require a job offer, and you need to go down the job route, you've already talked about needing a skill assessment, but even the cost of that varies, correct?
Yeah, so depending on your occupation, a skills assessment can be anywhere from like $500 to $3,500. So it varies. And so when we talk about ranges, it's because until we start looking at your specific situation and what you need to do, we can't confirm what the steps are going to be and what the costs you need to consider are. So I like to give the example of asking a quantity surveyor to tell you how much it's going to cost to build your house. If he hasn't got any plans, he's not going to be able to tell you. He can say roughly, but it'll be such a wide berth that it's actually not very helpful to anyone. So having that information means that once you know it, you can start to plan for it. You know, do I start saving? Do I decide that this isn't for me? Do I start now? Whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, look, and I think you know, we've also met with people who thought that they couldn't get in. Maybe they've had I don't know, they've been in charge of a vehicle where they were drinking, and they thought that that was a police record and it stopped them from migrating, but it doesn't necessarily stop them. So have you got examples like that where you've actually helped people who you thought, or they thought there was no chance?
Yeah. So obviously we have something in Australia called the character requirement, and that's that you need to meet a certain criteria so that you're not going to be a potential risk to the Australian public in terms of your past behaviour. So depending on the severity of the situation and how long ago it was, there are ways that we can, you know, plan around to make it that you do, you know, you're going to better meet the criteria and build a submission so that you can get your visa. We find men in general seem to have more colourful pasts than women, and normally from their youth. And so it's not the be all and end all. The more information we have, the better we can work out a plan for you.
Okay, fantastic. So in terms of the job market, I mean, even if you don't require a job to get into Australia, most people will want to have a job lined up because you want to start earning money, right? We're called Working In. We've been in the employment market in Australia since 2001, actually. So over 20 years now. We've got a lot of contacts, and part of what we do is we can help you. You're not bound to us, of course, but we have people based in Sydney who help skilled migrants find work and find the right employer. So part of our process, which probably makes us a little bit different to normal immigration agencies, is that we have a whole job network off the back of this. So Anita, generally speaking, what sort of people are you talking to who are looking to move to Australia? What are the kind of the jobs? Is it more in the healthcare, or is it more in construction? What are you recommending? Does it really matter?
Yeah, so I'm seeing a clear pattern for, especially in engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. So a lot of that, teachers as well. And a lot of times I find that I've had a few couples where maybe 6 or 7 candidates in the last 2 weeks or so, where the husband is an engineer and the wife is a teacher, together. And they say, well, who should apply? Is it me or is it her that should apply? And I say to them, we need to first have that assessment from you, and then we will tell you which is your best path, whether it's yourself, the engineer, or whether it's your wife, the teacher, that should be the main applicant on your visa application.
Yeah, it's interesting. The demand for engineering in Australia is like I've never seen. And as I said, we did that expo in Midrand in 2007, and we brought over numerous companies from Australia, big companies like Rio Tinto and BHP and Caterpillar, and really substantial employers that were hiring 30, 40, 50 people over the course of that weekend, because the demand in the mining industry in particular was so strong. It's similar now, but it's different because the infrastructure, the civil infrastructure industry has grown so much, and because the baby boomers are all retiring now and moving north, then places like Queensland are just pouring so much money into infrastructure, so roading and rail, and so there's a lot more opportunities for anybody in that incredibly diverse infrastructure industry. It's not just oil and gas and mining, which was the traditional markets for South Africans. It's actually extends way beyond that into vertical and horizontal infrastructure. And yeah, look, we're helping people getting interviews pretty much on a daily basis. Even though the borders are closed for some states, employers are actually interviewing and offering jobs to people on the condition that once the borders open, we can make the application. So I think in Queensland, when was it? It was a few days ago. They've made some concessions on the border. Nazim, this is happening all the time now. What we're seeing is in Australia in particular is an acknowledgement, like in South Africa, that Omicron has, Australia was a little bit behind South Africa, obviously, but there's an acknowledgement that it's going to peak and that those numbers are going to come down, and that there's going to be much more herd immunity, and therefore the borders can be opening, because there's so much pressure to open those borders and let students come back in. The borders have opened in Queensland, and what other states are doing that? Nazim, are you onto that today?
Yeah, so pretty much all of the East Coast is all open. So depending on which visa subclass you hold, if you're double vaccinated, you don't have to apply for a border exemption. Welcome in. WA is on its way to opening. They're a little bit more hesitant. So lots of people are doing an internal sort of quarantine, so to speak, before they can then sort of get on with it. But in general, the Australian government has opened up the borders for large cohorts of people, not tourists, not yet. So you really do need to be going in either as a student who already had a visa previously, or that's been recently approved. I think they had something like 40,000 students arrived last week, or up until last week. So that's like crazy numbers. Those on the permanent subclass visas and the provisional subclass visas, and then also all the employment-led visas as well, like a 482 or a 186. So lots of people are eligible to enter, but you need to have, those people will have started the process a while ago. They wouldn't have necessarily started it yesterday, because it does take time to get to that point.
Fantastic. And look, I just really do want to touch on something that I brought up at the beginning of the webinars about New Zealand, because Australia is very strict. I mean, Australia is driving for immigration. They have a very clear number of people that they wish to bring into the country this year. And so they create settings, which says, okay, well, this is how many people we think we can get. And part of the settings is the age requirement. Now, if you are, in your late 40s, then it's possible that you don't qualify. So there are other options. Nazim, do you just want to quickly run through that? Because being older than 45, I wouldn't qualify. And so I'm very empathetic to people who are in my age cohort. Nazim.
Yeah, so the normal age for qualifying under most of the skilled migration pathways is 45. So that's for permanent residency. So if you're going just based on a job and you're going to go work, there's no age limit, that's fine, but it's just a temporary work visa. There is some occupations that do qualify for an age waiver. And then you've also got the ability for some people, based on the role that they do, to qualify for an age waiver if they stay employed with their employer and earn a certain amount for a certain period of time. Now, if all of those options still don't work for you, you can always look at New Zealand. New Zealand has an upper age limit of 56 years of age. And so the immigration policies are not as many in New Zealand. So it's basically just a work visa or residence. Again, but it's based on the point system in New Zealand if you are wanting to migrate permanently. So part of what we do is, you might have seen earlier, there was like a website that was listed at the bottom that talked about getting an appraisal. That's where we take an initial look at your information to decide whether or not you qualify for Australia. It's really, really simple, but I can look at it and say probably not or yes. Sometimes we'll come back and ask more questions with the idea that maybe you can, we would recommend having a chat to see whether or not Australia is for you. Sometimes I might look and go, this person looks amazing, but I recommend they should consider New Zealand instead. And it'll be based on the information that you provide, and because we want to be open and honest about what we think your options will be.
Yeah, that's good. So look, I think hopefully what you can see from this webinar is what we'll do is, once we know, your situation, we'll bend over backwards to try and create the best possible pathway for you. We really do understand that you have a very strong driver to migrate. We've been doing this for years. We've literally talked to thousands of people. And we feel like a really strong connection with South Africans because of that. And so, really, we just like helping you. This is why we're in this industry. This is why we've been doing what we do. So, look, we are saying now is the time to migrate. There's a massive amount of people who are interested in migrating because of COVID. It's created this sort of life-changing type sentiment in people's heads. They're wanting a step change, and Australia and New Zealand are in incredible demand. So once those borders are open, applications are going to be coming in. They're going to be flooding in. You don't want to be at the back of that queue. You want to be at the front of that queue. Let me tell you that you really don't want to be at the back of that queue, because it may take years to actually process those visas. In New Zealand, people who had applied for residency in 2019 up until recently still hadn't had their visa processed. So you're talking over 2 years. So, there are extreme delays in visa processing at the moment. And you need to be aware of that. Australia takes a long time anyway, especially if you're coming in on a temporary visa, because you've got to go through so many steps. So it's all about taking that first step. Yes, there's an investment. Yes, you've got to pay, close on 4,000 Rand. But honestly, in all our experience, it's an insurance policy. It's possibly the best 4,000 Rand that you'll ever pay, because it'll give you the clarity that Nasim said, and the power to know, hey, this is what I can do. And you can take that report. You can go and show your siblings, you can go and show your partner, you can go and show your parents and go, wow, look, I've got this opportunity and this is what it means. And then, through that, we've got all the costs that are going to be, required in order to actually leave the country. And you'll just have this clarity. So, that's that's all we can really say at this point in time, because until we know your personal circumstances, we can't actually help you with all the detail. Look, Nazim, I think we should wrap up now. People can get on with their evening, watch some Netflix maybe. Have you got any last thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah, just if you are really keen and you do want to know, what that first step to migrate is free, complete our free appraisal online. And yeah, if it's a go, we'll tell you. If not, but if it is, you can have a chat with Anita, who'll go through and learn a little bit more about yourself and explain the process a bit more. And then, you can decide if you do want to proceed with the process or not. But if you're wanting to move, I recommend starting now.
Thank you. And Anita, look, you're based in Joburg, so you're available 5 days a week to talk to people. Do you have anything you'd like to say to everybody out there?
Yeah, just that I'm here and 5 days a week, fine. I'm even chatting to some people in the evenings because they work full day. Sometimes we have to do it on a Saturday because they have long hours. So I'm saying I'm available, and where we can accommodate you and we can find that 15 to 30 minute chat consultation to get to know each other better. I'm here on the ground for them, and just want to let them know that they've got somebody in South Africa that will hold their hands through this journey.
Nice. Thank you so much. And look, I concur with both Anita and Nazim. Let's just move to the next level. It's one step at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day. Know your options, get your power, and then you can make some really, really important decisions. And hopefully, move down to Australia and enjoy that amazing and safe lifestyle that Australians enjoy. So that's all from us. Thank you very much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you coming online and listening to this. And, also congratulations. You've taken that first step, and the first step's the most important step, they say. So good evening to you all, or good afternoon if you're elsewhere in the world, or good morning. And we hope to talk to you again. Goodbye. See you.